Hey there, Banditos. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
Welcome to the latest installment of the Dollar Bin Bandits on this July 6th. We hope everyone had a great 4th. It's a short week. Look, it's already Wednesday. And you know what that means? A brand new episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. And today, we're bringing you our interview with a comic book writer, Barbara Kesel. Barbara has had an interesting career, and look, I know we say that about every guest, but in all honesty, she really has had a very interesting career. Certainly because of her work, but also because she has a very unique point of view, given that she's a woman in a predominantly male-dominated industry, and she certainly doesn't hold back any of her stories.
Yes, I was very curious to hear about her stories about putting together the Hawk and Dove miniseries, which is early art for Rob Liefeld. But it was a series I enjoyed quite a bit. It really turned the characters in a whole new direction instead of set the course for them to go forward into the future.
Yeah, Barbara's worked for just about every publisher under the sun. So we mentioned already DC. She did quite a bit of work for Image, in fact, taking over for Alan Moore on Wildcats, which had to be a big assignment. And one of my favorites was Comics Greatest World, which was Dark Horse's attempt to kind of get into the superhero world building business, which I thought was an interesting attempt. I'd love to see more of it. But as Joe alluded to, it was great to hear her perspective, not always positive, about, being a woman coming up in this industry and, faced a lot of adversity and, a lot of shenanigans that probably shouldn't have been going on and certainly would not be going on nowadays. But let's hear it all from Barbara herself. This is Barbara Randall Kesel.
Because we're talking to none other than Barbara Randall Kesel.
Yay.
So, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to be completely honest with you about something which I think is pretty darn funny. We talked to your ex-husband previously, and up until that moment, actually, the interview we had prior to speaking to him, we always thought the last name was Kesel. And
That's
it wasn't
Star Wars. Star Wars did that to you.
I think so. It ingrained it in our head.
Nope.
And then we were talking to Dan Jurgens, I believe it was, and it was or Jerry Ordway or one of the two, and they said Kesel. I'm like, whoa, blew our minds. Anyway, just a
It's such a cute
pointless
little name.
yeah. But I'm going to ask you the same question we start off with everyone: is how did you discover comics?
The first comic I picked up was a coverless copy of Aquaman #7. But I might have seen comics before, but that was the first one I noticed. But I grew up with the Adventures of Superman black and white TV show, and then the Superman Aquaman cartoons on Saturday morning. And I thought Aquaman was awesome. I loved the seahorses. They were so cool. And then when we moved down to Texas, I lived down the road from NASA during the Apollo years. So it was very much a energized kind of place, but there was a used bookstore that had coverless comics, i.e. fraud, and I would get as many as I could. We would collect bottles, turn them in, get our nickels and dimes, and go down and spend them on comics and then trade with each other. And that's where I discovered comics, fell in love with the Legion of Superheroes, picked up a lot of new comics, picked up chunks of comics at the time, started coming in like any fangirl complaining about waves and patterns of story and arcs and representation of characters and all that. And they said, you can write them letters. And I thought, that's right. I'm getting these new, I can write them letters. Dear Mr. Giordano, I just found the comic that started me off. And I will contact the writer before identifying it in public. But it's the issue that contains the letter in the back where somebody wrote in and said, Dear DC, how come your male characters seem kind of, well-rounded and your female characters are stereotypes? Maybe you ought to hire some women writers and artists. And Dick Giordano or his assistants somewhat flip editorial replies, I don't think it's it. What do you think? And I was like, Dear Mr. Giordano, here's how 10,000 actors can play Hamlet and make it fresh each time. You need to do this and that and this and that. And by the way, I think your writers and artists would possibly observe and possibly talk to some women. So 25 years later, I find out he gets the letter on the day Jeanette walks into his office and said, Dix, there's one woman in editorial that will change by the end of the month. So boom, one-stop shopping, he's done.
Wow.
But that was kind of a long adventure of many comics. And
Wow.
and a great Pfeiffer's Books and Teaks in Pomona, California, in the This would be like, gosh, 78 to 83, the years I was there buying stuff. And then in 84, I went to work for DC. I probably dropped 3/4 of my salary in there.
I wanted to dig back into this, the lore of the, at least how it's portrayed on Wikipedia, our, research tool, this 10-page letter to Dick Giordano,
I think I have
laid it all out there. Do you still,
it's
is
before
that still
computers.
in an archive somewhere?
I think I had, I'm sure he tossed it, because again, I never thought about it twice. I had like the rough draft. That was before we kept copies of everything. But that was, he offered me a job, and then he gave me the first assignment to write some Batgirl backups, which lasted for exactly 2 scripts, because he got promoted. Len Wein replaced him and replaced Batgirl with Catwoman as a backup and detective. But at the time, first Dick offered me a job after, I'm skipping forward several steps, called me, asked me to come down to San Diego to meet him. I spent a day with him in 1981 at the San Diego Comic-Con, and the last year it was at the Hell Cortez. I thought I'd get 10 minutes. He adopted me for the day and took me along to all his business meetings and gave me sort of a summary before of who he was going to be talking to, what they wanted, what he wanted to give them. He was training me. He was training me for the job that he had decided I had already that I didn't take then. And at the end of the day, he offered me a job, and I said, I'd really like to finish my degree. I don't want to stop in the middle. So Greenberger got my job. And then he offered me that Batgirl backup, but he said, guys won't like a new girl's name coming in. So write like Carrie Burkett. So I wrote like Carrie Burkett, statistically, analytically, scansion and pattern, etc., with a little bit of flourishes of my own. And I found out Trevor Von Eaton was going to be drawing it when I picked it up off the newsstand, because I wrote it for Jose Delbo, who had been writing the backups. So it was deliberately skewed towards things I thought Jose did really well. And then I'm picking it up on the stands going, I didn't write a Trevor Von Eaton script. I could have written a Trevor Von Eaton script. This is not bad. So that still exists out there somewhere. What did you
want to bring to the Batgirl character that you thought was maybe missing?
I hated her.
Oh, really?
I hated her because my name is Barbara and my father's name is James. And when I was in 2nd grade, before I'd seen the TV show, other kids had. So I had 2 boys who were the Joker and the Penguin, who would wait for me to try to capture me or beat me up every morning. And it was all like fun and games to them. It was terror to me. So I hated her. So when I got offered that, I was like, oh, thank. Yeah, thank. But I dug through the history. I guess my approach to all this stuff is I want to honor any story anybody's ever written. So I want all the continuity to be real, even if it's sort of retconned, reinterpreted, etc. So I took all the facts that had laid out about Batgirl, decided she was 26 years old, and more importantly, in 1981, decided the costume was made of leather, which gave a whole different skew to the entire thing. And in my head canon, she was obsessed with Batman. Batman was like from the point of view of the sort of teenage girl when she started out, that's that fantasy, sexy older male figure, the man, And since then, there's been a lot of decision making about her relationship with Robin. But as far as I was concerned, she thought Robin was like the junior high schooler who ought to go away, But so all of it had to do with it being sort of her sensual side out there on display, where she was kind of closeted during the day and had this secret life. And so we actually expected the backup to go longer. I had written out an outline of several stories and things that would happen as milestones for the character development of this character. And that kind of went into the place where things go when something gets canceled. But the joke was I wrote 1 2-part story that came out with Trevor's art. Then I wrote another 2-page story that was used forever as the test story for a lot of new artists. But it went out with my name and address and my name and phone number attached at the top. So I got all sorts of calls from people who were doing this sample story for DC Comics wanting to know what a baton was because it was set in the theater. And I don't remember names at all. So I don't know if any of those people actually ended up in the industry, but it became this running joke where I said to Dick, could you white it out on the next copy? Because it's getting weird.
I'm also curious about another series you worked on, Hawk and Dove.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did they approach you to look at the characters, or did you approach
them? No. Carl had done a picture of a female dove in his sketchbook, which is only different from the Dove we end up having because there's no ponytail. He just did the, the kind of bald head like the original Dove. And I looked at that one day and I said, that's cool. When did that one show up? He goes, oh, I always thought Dove should be a girl. It ought to be, balanced out, yin yang, etc. And that started us talking, and that we put in a pitch. And then I went to Mike Carlin and I said, there's this new artist that I want to use. I've been working with this kid. And I think he's going to be popular.
Turns out you're right.
So how did that work out? No,
I had to, I had to argue because Carlin didn't really want to use him, and then with Carl inking him, that was okay. As long as there was a pro kind of finishing it up and adding feet.
What did you think of the Ditko, Rob?
You know what? At the time, I got to tell you guys, I mean, Rob takes a lot of shit, and some of it from me during the time when he screwed up the finishing of Hawk and Dove. But he was so fantastically, energetically enthusiastic about it all, and soaked up influences like a sponge, and was constantly sort of reinventing his approach and style. So he really was this fresh rock and roll energy coming to comics. Anyway, next question.
I totally agree. I just wanted to know your thoughts on the Ditko run of Hawk and Dove. What did you think worked for the stories, and what maybe things that you would have changed?
Well, I liked it. It was of its time. I mean, by the time we were doing the rework, it was the 80s. Everybody was obsessed with like shareholder value and obsessively screwing over the little people, as opposed to the first series came out at the height of the sort of 70s peace love movement, and people really philosophically examining those choices. So it's sort of a perfect primer of its time. Mm-hmm. But it did not age well because its audience was kind of older at the time, and the new younger audience from the 80s wasn't going to be, it wasn't going to be responding to that at all. But we kept it valid mm-hmm. by just going for the next stage, as opposed to going back and saying, oh, that one didn't exist. Nothing has come before me.
Makes sense.
So that I guess I feel like anything you love ought to be able to continue to exist out there. Somebody might come up with a fresher take on it or add to it, but I don't think you need to burn down what came before to do a good story.
Amen to that.
I wanted to shift to your work at Dark Horse and Comics Greatest World. I'd love to know how that all came about, your switching companies, and then if you were part of the formation of that imprint. And
that came about a couple of years after I got out there. I mean, what happened first was people like Mignola and Kelly Jones came to Dark Horse in that next wave of creator stuff after Dave Gibbons and Frank. And so what happened is Dark Horse kind of realized they didn't own anything. They had a bunch of licenses all around, which was nice. But if it came down to somebody evaluating your company, they'd want to see that you owned something. So it kind of became, hey, can we do for superheroes what we did for licenses like Star Wars and Aliens? Can we make it real? Can we make it a little bit more adult in the complicated sense, not just in thinking of the phrase I can use online as opposed to what's in my head, the naughty bits and the naughty words. Okay. So
you can use them.
Yeah.
So
cool.
We put together a superhero universe that was built sort of by committee, and we had sort of a standing rule. If you walked in with a proposal, then you were the creator of that. If not, it kind of went into a company pool because it was generated by consensus, which is how I lost Ghost. That was based on my story, but it came in and got grafted to a image that Chris Warner had done that Mike liked. So Catalyst was mine, except Mike has forgotten that. Anyway, the idea was, let's have something that energizes us, comes into that superhero energy that we remember, but kind of gets played up like something for a more modern audience of the type we have and want. And then we kind of seemed to have tripped ourselves up at the end for a number of reasons that I can't make public. But partly it was a toy manufacturer saying, but if we do toys, we can't do toys for grown-up stories. So there was a certain amount of dumbing down by the time we actually went to print. But it's a heck of a lot of fun to make up your own universe, and especially when you get to do it so that other people are going to see it.
Do you think there's enough potential in those characters to ever be revived or evolved?
There's always that potential in anything. It's a case of whether people decide they want to do it or not. Do they feel like it's worth their time to bring that up and redo it in some way, or to do something fresh and new? And that evaluation can only be made based on based on who they are, what they're doing, what kind of money they've got to play with, and what kind of talent they've got in their stable. So that's an editorial answer.
Right. Oh, makes sense. I hope they revive it, but we'll see if I can get the groundswell going.
Now, did you enjoy your time with Image? Because you got there, they started off, with a bang, but the criticism was always, well, the art's great, but the writing's not so good. And then they brought, folks like yourself in and other, established writers to help stabilize these books. When you got there, what were your thoughts on Image itself?
Well, it wasn't so much I got there. It was, I did work for 2 editors who had contacted me as part of a series of freelance work where I was working for multiple people. So I'm trying to think of what I did for Wildstorm. I did Savant Guard with Ryan. I did 2 issues of Wildcats. Most intimidating thing ever. Follow Alan Moore for 2 issues. Before they had a new crew starting, but had a hole in the middle. And then I did 2 backups for Wildstorm. And part of it was the puzzle of I felt they had so much potential in their stuff, but hadn't necessarily done any kind of depth of storytelling. So, one of my short stories in the back was just the Lady or the Tiger idea, placed in the idea of here's a character who can trigger powers in others, but she knows if she triggers the power in this person, it may destroy the world. Do you do it or not do it? And I left it open. And the other one was, they're always telling you Fuji's funny, but they never show him being funny. So I tried to show the character Fuji being funny and not actually very funny. Tried to have it be an in-character funny, where people would laugh because it's him trying to make the joke, not because the joke's funny. But I was very proud of my Wildcat story because I felt like I came up with a gimmick worthy of Alan, which was, I think it's, oh God, I want to say, was it Mike Heisler? Whoever created one of the character, the villain character, had basically thrown off this comment, about the character. This character responds to language intuitively. I thought, whoa, if you respond to language intuitively, when somebody says a word, you know the meaning first. So how does Savant stop the bad guy? By saying a series of words like duty, honor, loyalty. I don't remember what they were right now because too many things, too many scripts and universes later. But I was so proud of that because it was like a surprise ending, but it was absolutely perfectly logical. So that was good. But like Savant Guard, we were definitely second wave Wildstorm and kind of treated like this weird little cousin. But I had a great time on that. And, it's led to Ryan bringing me in to work with him again on his Shadow Zone project. But but it wasn't so much me working with Image, the company, and a lot of the people there. It was more a freelance assignment remotely for 1 editor who worked there or 2 editors who worked there. So it's not like you're hanging around with the kids at the clubhouse talking about everything. You're just going, when is this script due? Okay.
As a writer, is it difficult when, like you said, Alan Moore did a couple stories, then you jumped in after him. When you kind of come into a story or to a book midstream, do you try to emulate the tone of the previous writer, or do you go in fresh with, this is how I want things to, this is my vision, and I'm going to take it from there?
It truly depends on the timing of the assignment, because sometimes when you're filling, you want a moment, you want to try to stand out. Everything's different. So you want to try to make it stand out as its own nice thing in the middle. Because if you're trying to make it like the book that came before and the book that came after, you have a clunky disparity. But if you come and say in different color, people will like it or not, but they're not coming in with an expectation of something that isn't delivered. But you try to keep the characterization consistent, and the same, only different rule applies. You want somebody to come in going, oh, this is kind of like a nice change of pace, but it also seems to need to fit. I've done more one-shots than I've done anything else, usually through not being the A-team talent out there and being sometimes just having a small amount of time. So it's like I can fit in one, but I can't do more. But for the most part, I've initiated series, but I don't think I've really picked up one in progress that I've had to worry too much about the transition on, not one that I was going to keep. And if I have, I've kind of forgotten about it.
Do you prefer writing your own characters and your own creations, or do you like, jumping into someone else's characters and taking them on a different path?
Everybody always wants to do their own creative voice and their own creative stuff, but I realized over the years, I always kind of get bored on that. I mean, I guess what I've always liked best is the crazy challenge of, oh, we have 2 pages a month in the Diamond catalog for 12 months, and then we're going to make it into one story. So let's write a story. It's the puzzle of it. Let's write a story that works as a 2-page cliffhanger and then holds together as a 24-page story, which was Alien's Booty that I did with Ron Randall. I guess I like the challenge of the most interesting way to fill a small box. So I'm more drawn to licensed stuff than doing stuff perfectly on my own, because when it comes to like my fantasy stories, you don't need to read them. I can make them up for myself and be fine. When it comes to stuff I've created, quite often I hate it when they get it wrong if it's mine, so I don't want them working on it. But if it's somebody else's toys, it's like, oh, what's an interesting new way to work with this one? And because everybody's supposed to want to do their own creator-owned stuff, it took me a long time to realize that was not what I wanted. Because everybody's supposed to want to be a freelancer and want to be off on their own and want to do this. And I'm like, what I really liked best was the bigger construction jobs, the building jobs. Mm-hmm. So at DC, I built a new license with the TSR Dungeons and Dragons books. Mm-hmm. At Dark Horse, I helped build a new universe. At a new line of comics. At CrossGen, I got to build a new universe and kind of govern the rules behind it and the coordination of it. And now at the company I'm working for now, I'm setting up the building blocks of the universe, but I've also been very involved in what will be the company culture and the structure of everything from the ground up. So that's it turns out I really want to be an architect, apparently. So.
I'd love to turn back. You just mentioned CrossGen, and now I'm just realizing, after having gone through a number of questions already, how many different publishers you worked with. But CrossGen is always an interest of ours, and especially talking with creators, because it was such a fertile and collaborative place from what we can gather from everybody who's worked there. And I was wondering if your experience was the same, working sort of in tandem with the artists, and did you have a really good creative experience there?
I had an awkward experience there. And part of it was there was one guy who initiated the get together of all the guys. And so it became Guys Club versus the girls. Yeah. And a lot of let's dump on the girls because they're not any good. A lot of intimating what I'd done to get my job because everybody knows she isn't any good. And so I found I had an awkward fight forward to work with my teams. And there was so much interesting good stuff that came out of there. It's like all the artists there got better because they were in a crucible of being, having the tension of freelance work taken away by a regular salary. The tension then became, you got to do X amount of work in a week, but everybody had to post their pages, and you'd see artists review each other's, and they'd learn each other's shortcuts or processes, which meant sometimes they would just pick up that shortcut or process, but sometimes they would develop a new one of their own. It's like you put people into a learning environment and take away their biggest source of fear, and then all of a sudden they're exploring and they're testing and trying things that they hadn't done before. I loved the fact that we got to do Meridian. That was the kind of book I'd always wanted to do, and most of the publishers at the time were like, we do girl books, we do this romance book. And I go, well, you could have shot me in the head before I'd read a romance book. Those are stupid. I said I want to do Star Wars where a girl is the star, Indiana Jones where a girl is the star, etc. You're not getting it. I want to do real stories. And Meridian was my chance to do that. It's a girl lead, but it's still sort of a classic adventure story, or fantasy adventure story. But there was, CrossGen was aggressively male, not really keen on having all the titty art hanging on the wall. There were other things where it very much played to the boy fantasy of workplace. And sometimes I got really tiresome, but 95% of the people there I just loved to pieces. I loved getting to work with George finally, because I'd worked with George as his editor, but I'd never had him write a story for me or write a story with me. And that was just magic. And I don't know. There's a lot of new talent that came out of there, and a lot of talent that really got boosted coming out of there. And the biggest boost was for the colorists. It was the first company that really treated the colorists as part of the art team. And that allied with technology reaching a point where Photoshop could actually be used to create art from the colors, not just fill in the blank to tell the character's art, which is it had kind of been up till then. So it's Mark Alessi was a self-avowed asshole and often lived up to it. He would push people, but there was sort of an endless money stream available that seduced most of the people in-house. And when it was suddenly turned off, they turned vicious. So many of the Mark stories are 99% earned, and some of the Mark stories are 50% earned, and the rest is just crankiness because my comfortable golden nest went away. I hate you.
Right. So ultimately,
but it was an adventure. It was a quite the experiment, and in many ways it did work.
Yeah. It sounds like overall the experience was an unfortunate mixed bag. It had a lot of what you were looking for in terms of the building and architecture of a new universe, and a lot of the creative pluses, but unfortunately that kind of attitude and sausage fest like atmosphere that nobody wants to really work in, or certainly nobody like you would want to work in, and I don't see anybody I know that would want to work in that.
I got really good at foosball though.
Well, there you go. That's a plus.
That's a resume builder right there. I wanted to ask, because you are, having just, spoken to you for the past half hour or so, you're clearly a very strong personality who is not afraid to tell people kind of, how it is, which I can absolutely 100% appreciate. What has been your experience like as a woman in all these, I mean, you touched on it for CrossGen, but, having worked for all these major publishers over the years, what has it been like for you in these somewhat male-dominated, publishing companies?
I had the unfortunate timing to come to DC, but after Karen, and get to Dark Horse after Diana. So I was second woman. So they had one that they could trot out to conventions and things. They had another that they could overlook. I have never been good at tooting my own horn. I would do a lot of heavy lifting, but not get a lot of credit for it. What I ran across mostly in the early days is the assumption and the Teflon slide. The assumption is the guys band together at conventions, and the guys get together and go out to dinner, and then the guys want to go to the strip clubs. They don't want any girls along. So the assumption is the guys will be hanging out with the guys. The Teflon slide that I refer to is you'd stand around in a group of people at a convention, and you could watch the guy's eyes bob from one guy to another as they go around the circle talking about comics. And they'd ignore the women. They'd slide over them. They'd delete them because they were usually wives or girlfriends or of no importance, unless there were boobs to look at. And then I would say something cogent that had to do with the conversation with comics or showed some sort of knowledge. And it was like I had teleported in. I had gone from invisibility to visibility. And then half the time would be immediately hit on. If I didn't respond positively, then I was that bitch. So it was an awkward time at the beginning. Now, yes, I'm forceful and I speak out. That's mostly turning 50. That's not the way I've always been. I used to be shyer than shy. On that first day, when Dick had me sit in all his meetings, I was long hair, falling forward, probably sitting like this. And the guys who came in for their meetings didn't know who I was, dismissed me as assistant or a daughter, and didn't pay any attention whatsoever to me. But I sucked in every nuance of the conversation with them and did mental dossier of, I got to see who Dick played and who played him and make notes for the future. And then a year or two later, when a lot of those guys were working for me, they didn't realize I had sort of an insider access. Most of them didn't remember me at all, and which was fine. But my first years of going to comic conventions were a whole lot of, first question would be, who are you here with? When the answer was on my own, here's my room number, here's my key, here's my this. And, I just smile like, why? I don't know what you're talking about. This isn't thinking A, never in your lifetime. B, that's not why I'm here, dude. So I'll just ignore you. But it was not It's not like I was any great raving beauty or anything. I was a loose female in in an area where there were none. I had giant convention bathrooms to myself. Not anymore. But it gets really tiresome. I mean, I really did become one of the guys in so many ways, which is a plus when you're included in the conversation. It's a negative when the conversation goes to places you'd rather not be hearing, or just find really tiresome, you know. And it's sort of led to a rift with some of the young women of the industry who are very femme, etc., and don't. The youngsters who are angry at me for not fixing feminism when I started, and I keep having to explain, hello, I had to be heard first. I couldn't be heard without a certain protective colorization. I don't even know what I'm saying.
Totally.
But I loved it. See, I just loved all of it so much. But the other part I had would be the women. It's like you go to a house party, a bunch of comics people, all the guys are gathered talking comics, and then there'll always be some woman who wanted to drag me off to the kitchen to talk hair or kids or this kind of stuff, none of which interests me in any way whatsoever. So I'd find a way to like try to worm myself back to the conversation I wanted to be in. But there was that sort of automatic culling. So I don't know. It sounds like it was awful. So much of it was wonderful.
I absolutely respect your answer. I mean, it's you know, you don't want, as a fan, you certainly don't want to hear all the garbage that went on. But obviously, look, we're grown-ups. We know there was some shit back in the day.
The important thing, though, it wasn't intentionally garbage. I think so many of the people doing things that would put them into the Me Too category now were thinking from themselves, were the same sort of, if you sat them down and had them ask real questions of the other person and listen to the answers, would probably have woken up to a sense of greater empathy. That there was an environment which indicated, okay, walk people into a giant candy store, and if they're grabbing for the candy, you can't really complain. But there are so many really good-hearted guys who were also young, horny, doing seed and girl, you know. And we all lose perspective. Guys tend to pursue and not hear the no's. Women tend to build an entire romantic fantasy out of the scantiest of information. These some things sometimes collide horribly. That obsession can happen on both ends. And it is very exciting to me personally that so many of these conversations are happening now. Because some of the same guys who would be over the top, terrific, grabby assholes never intend to be, okay, some do, but so many of them have no recognition of what their behavior is like, but especially if we're talking like a power imbalance. If you have sort of a Me Too situation, sometimes you have someone who is the boss of the other. And so they interpret, mostly guys, but it can be women, they interpret from their point of view. If there is no denial or defense, they interpret it the way they want to, and don't realize that by just saying, would you like to go out to dinner? The other person can be hearing, this is a threat. If I don't go along, I will lose my job. And that person's just thinking, would you like to go to dinner? And unawareness of the power balance is what makes for bad dynamics here. So it kind of comes down to communication on both sides of kind of talking about stupid global issues and I don't mean to be excusing the jerks on both sides. But there's been such a paradigm shift in what is allowable. Okay, in the 90s, I think it's the 90s, I have to admit, I was totally disgusted when I go to like San Diego and guys had their Playboy girls, their hustler honeys at their booths. I'm sorry, that's backroom stuff. And that phase is largely over. Now it's the girl cosplayers dressing the same way, etc. So the attitude of the person in the outfit can help determine the effect the outfit has. It's not about what they're wearing or what they're doing. It's about, I have mangled an argument here so much that I'm kind of making a mess of it. But anyway, I have watched comics go from something where there was a lot of sin and skin involved, And now there's still a lot of skin, but there's a lot of people on both sides, younger, older, whatever, realizing, oh, this is what they think I mean, or oh, this is what they think I'm saying. And there is a lot, there's awkward communication now, but there will be better communication. And the people who were doing shitty stuff who thought it could remain in the shadows are being called out about it, and it's being publicized, and they're discovering how much people talk. And so certain kinds of behavior cannot go on anymore. And when people have been victimized, they have support networks built in. They have the power to speak about it and have people chime in and say, no, that was really lousy, it was really terrible, let me help take care of you, let's get this fixed. I also believe human beings can evolve, and it can be a total shit one year and you can actually learn your way out of it a few years later. So I don't like to permanently label, I don't like to label people with a Sharpie when it can be a washable marker, but you gotta at the same time be aware. So.
Makes sense. I wanted to shift and get your take on women in comics nowadays, because I mean, you see just, I mean, there's not one, I would say, show, movie, comic book that doesn't have a kick-ass woman in it. And it wasn't that way a few years ago. It was all guys for the most part, and you had the women that you did have were, dare I say, they were relegated to the, well, I believe the saying was women in refrigerators, which I real have a hard time saying that out loud. But
well, it was the era of the replaceable girlfriend.
Yeah.
That there's that where, okay, at the beginning you had girl characters for a male audience, so they're either, you know, unobtainable sexual object or a perfect wife or perfect teenage girlfriend. You know, they didn't give a lot of time or effort to the characterization of them beyond a certain minimum level, because we all have an internal bias. If I'm writing a story, I'm going to tend to empathize and think through the lead female character. If you have a male writer, they're most likely going to tend to empathize and think through the lead male character. If they are trained to stop and focus on every character, then all the characters are complete, even if they have one line. If they don't step out of the natural bias, then everything relates to the male characters. The female characters are standing around doing nothing unless something needs to happen for the male character, because they're not going over and thinking there, and vice versa. It goes, if for every person, whatever your polarization is, you tend to pick one in the center. And if you go back through and identify each character and try to person them, you get a better story overall, because a cool person with an attitude that says 3 words can stand, it can retain, can persist in the mind, as well as somebody who's gone on for argument after argument after argument. So 4 years, good-hearted white males did comics. Artists would look over at the mirror to draw someone. They wouldn't necessarily look at people on the street around them. Writers would think, how would I do this? And do it and put a story together. But if it was a female character, it was the other, the outside. It might be modeled on someone, but often it was women who think like men. And okay, I'm a big believer in the whole yin yang theory of, in terms of individuals, you're mostly one thing or you're mostly another, but you got little pockets of both, and that no 2 individuals are exactly the same. So I think people are a map of all over there. I really prefer writers to individualize all their characters and not think of them as the male character, the female character. But we went through waves of, you went through those sort of idealized role models, and then you went to, you know, the killer militaristic butch bitch, and the super sexy one, the villain, or the scary sexy woman, etc. And then you went to younger and younger characters looking over sexualized. And now you've come into a new wave of people going, wait, the post Harry Potter, post My Little Pony world, where you have kids growing up with fictions that have an assumption of participation by both genders, changes the way they see story in the world. And all of a sudden it's like, whoever's in the group that isn't you can also be human. And we are seeing, oh my God, just having come off being an Eisner judge, we're seeing a whole new wave of different types of creators, because what has evolved is not just that more girls are involved in comics, women, but that comics is finally broadening into a medium. as opposed to just the superhero pamphlet story for a male reader. All of a sudden, what we've been talking about wanting to happen is happening largely through the kid and young adult market, but all those kids are going to grow up. So the comics that they do after what they've grown up with are going to work by different rules. They're not limiting themselves to superhero action. They're not limiting themselves to the visuals of how things have been shown before. Because you think post-Ren and Stimpy, everything that's gone on since then in animation has introduced every kid watcher to a huge range of acceptable physical types and forms. That there isn't just the cleave to the old Archie look, or it's not all Kurt Swan Superman lineup. And so we're seeing comics strengthen into a medium that allows people to participate in a medium without ever having read a comic book. They're coming in from their graphic novel or web comics portals, or just doing imagery and all that. And that's really amazing, because it just means now we're books. we're anything. And you know, as I say to every guy who's complaining about superhero comics, you should have Raina Tegelmeyer's sales figures. And if you don't know who that is, you need to go and find out right now.
I'm on it. I will say, like, as a fan who has a daughter, just like my two friends here, I think it's a pretty great time for, you know, women. Oh, there's my phone. Look at that. You know, for women and girls to be reading comics, because there is quite literally, and not just women, there's really something for everyone.
Yes.
Someone of any you know, nationality, sexual preference, whatever that may be, there is someone that they can identify with.
You also have readers opening themselves up to reading so much more. 20 years ago, a little boy wouldn't have touched anything that was in any way pink. And then 10 years ago now, suddenly we had little boys rushing up to get My Little Pony comics because it spoke to them. Actually, that's the best primer on the fact that girl does not mean one thing ever, because there's 6 lead girls who are all a girl and they're all different. But anyway, I'll let you continue your question.
Yeah, no, I you know, I was just saying that as a fan, and you know, I think it's pretty, you know, it's great because you know, again, as we were growing up, there was really one type of comic, and the women that were in those comics were, you know, wearing this much of an outfit, and they didn't really do a whole hell of a lot. And
they were one type of way.
Yeah. So you know, I as a fan, I'm really enjoying it, and to see that it's, you know, expanded and broadened, you know, so much.
There were 3 types: superhero, funny animal, and Archie. And now they all kind of bleed together and change each other.
My daughter is on a steady diet of you know, these original graphic novel series like the 5 Worlds, and she started out with My Little Pony. And yeah, I mean, to your point, it is just the Wild West out there in a really, really good way, in terms of the material, in terms of the creators and the perspectives that are being brought here. And she's going to go on to, I have a feeling she will read comics for life, and they will almost maybe even exclusively be not superheroes,
Well,
because
none of them
that's
are
her choice, and
comics.
there's going to be enough stuff to support that.
It's all graphic novels. That's the phrase everybody knows.
Right.
Most of the graphic novels out there have nothing to do with being a graphic novel, but that they know the book form, and the whole idea of collecting, because part of it used to be the hunt, doesn't hold appeal.
Yeah.
Having things digital tends to hold appeal, but I mean, I grew up in the era where it was pretty girl or dumpy girl. It was smart or pretty, and pretty or evil. And all of a sudden you have a wider spread where just the definition of girl has widened, so that it can be one of a bunch of different types, etc. But I want that for boys too. I mean, I always get labeled a feminist, and I am, but I fought for a world where girls can grow up to be firefighters and boys can make cupcakes, whatever they want to do. And now see also every baking show ever, that there is both a frustrated backlash of people wanting the world to hold to a version they felt they understood as kids, And then there's a whole bunch more people saying, I'm not acknowledging any fences. I'm going where I want to. And then in between are most people kind of going, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Because the world, okay, this theory I use a lot in lectures, the world goes way to one side, and then it corrects and it goes way to the other. And in between it comes to the middle. But the middle it comes to is not the same one that the people who are stayed there recognize. And so if they can't jump forward to it, they're frustrated at the world not being the same, the world not making sense, because the opposite of change is not stasis, it's entropy. And as I remember, God, years and years and years ago, standing in the middle of my street with the kid across the street who just gotten one of those Casio digital watches, which probably predates all you guys by 10 or 20 years, but the first digital watches.
Mike had
And
one.
we said to each other, our generation, our parents' generation is the last generation that will ever be surprised by change. Our generation will be surprised when things don't change. And for the most part, I found that to be true. Sometimes when there's some weird restaurant I like and 20 years later it's still there, I'm shocked. And there's been a couple of times when things have really thrown me. Like the first time I went into the deconstructed Apple store with no front desk.
Right.
I don't know where to go. I don't know who I'm supposed to talk to. Where do I check out? And yeah, I remember being startled like that. But everything else, and part of it was living down the road from NASA, the expectation that technology will evolve and things will change has always been a part of my life. And you have a generation, the biggest flaw I see in the generation now is they forget not everyone had instant access to all the information. And so they have an expectation of their parents and grandparents' generations that they knew these things, that A, all these things were out and spoken about, and B, and that everybody knew. To which I use the example of the Holocaust. How could so many of these horrible things have happened in a town where, yeah, some people knew and approved, but I think a whole lot of other people, there's always been genocide. There's always been people hating people. There's always been people using weapons to hurt people. And you have the trifecta of technology, media, and ill will coming together in a way that could be documented and preserved so people would believe it happened. And it happened at such a grossly atrocious over the top level that has not yet been, thank God, challenged. But it's not as simple as these people commit genocide. All us people commit to all humans. There's genocide all over the place. There's the constant misuse of technology against people. So it has to just be balanced out by people attempting to work better, do something better. Okay, I'm meandering again.
No, that's okay.
This is why I don't do drugs, because I'm only vaguely tethered to reality in the first place.
Well, I think we went to some interesting places personally.
Hell yeah.
I told you the 3 words you need, right?
I'm
Yeah,
not gonna
yeah.
say it.
No,
I'm not saying.
we'll never, cork that bottle. So sort of bring it out of the back from the philosophical realm, which I personally love. But back to sort of the creative realm, I'd love to know what you are working on now or in the near future that we would.
I
all
work
be
for a
interested to
technology
hear.
startup that has a new computer technology. We're building an app that will combine comic style storytelling with this new technology to bring something new to an audience out there. And that is as much as I can say about it. I'm making up a bunch of
Wow.
situations and places and characters, and I'm getting people to do pictures of them, and someday you'll see them. Hello,
I
here's
like
my
it.
NDA.
That's fantastic to hear.
I've been
I
able
would
to
love to know what that is, but I will try to wait
Yeah.
patiently.
Yeah, you have to wait, probably end of this year, beginning of next year. It seems like it's taken forever, and it has. I was telling a writers group earlier today, I said, with my job, we're building an app, etc. I feel sometimes like the LA cliche, I'm writing a screenplay, because no one can see what I'm doing yet. So from the point of view of most people in comics, I just retired or disappeared. It's like, no, I've been working a lot. It's just not public yet. So it's both energizing and excruciating for that reason. But my paycheck's clear, so that's good.
That's a very important part.
I've
of the
been able to
equation.
work in a couple of one shots, and they kind of show up. I constantly want to do something. I don't like doing the same thing I've always done. So like Rance asked me to do a little story for a Joan Jett anthology. So I thought, okay, everybody else is going to be doing the stories. I'm going to do a new song based on the song, but that song will be shown in image form. Essentially, the words are there too. That Kurt asked me to do one of the Marvel snapshots. And so it kind of flipped the script on him because I think he was imagining it was going to be about this firefighter character, and I ended up making it about the girl nurse. But I added battle bunkers to the Marvel universe, where people go when something is crashing through your city. Like you used to have the whole civil defense shelters. Well, in the Marvel universe, then they have fully stocked little battle bunkers on every couple of blocks. So when things are raining down bricks and mortar, you shove people into those spaces. And that story is about how one also gets damaged, so people are stuck inside for a while.
It's kind of like damage control, that group that cleans up after all the superheroes battle it out.
It's not so much about the people cleaning up, it's about the people trapped inside.
Right, yeah, no, but I'm just saying this is like the
what's
unseen
going on
stuff.
during the disaster. Yeah.
It's like all the logistics of superhero fights that we don't think about.
That no one thinks about.
I'm working on Shadow Zone 2 with Ryan, and we are working around incompatible schedules and us having no time. So we're moving glacially slowly. We did a Kickstarter for the first volume, which is out there. Fantasy story that's his personal imaginary universe. And I'm helping him carve stories out of it. See, I did an essay on Batgirl for Jim Beard. He does these series of books that are basically people rewatching the old Batman TV series and making comments. So mine was the Enter Batgirl one. So you have to read this story in a snarky California girl voice, because that's how I wrote it. Oh my God,
That's interesting.
But all these things that come along, it's like I can't seem to just do something in a straightforward way. I have to figure out how to twist it somehow. I should do something fresh with it, because otherwise I'd be bored. It's like I did a Sensation Comics Wonder Woman that was digital first and printed in a one-shot comic that's now out in trade paperback form. Mm-hmm. And if you look at my script, there's 3 chapters to when Christy offered me assignment, I could have 10 pages of anything I wanted to do, or 30 pages if I used a cover she had. It was a cat fight cover, not my favorite kind of cover, but I thought, okay, all right. I want the 30 pages. What can I do? So there's 3 girls in the story, and the 3 girls are the 3 different responses to celebrity. I thought, if superheroes are in the real world, it's going to be as much like the Kardashians as it is like reverence of gods. So we have the shipper, the scoffer, and the blogger, and responding to a Wonder Woman sighting. And the one's like, you're not so great. And, the one's like, oh my God, you're so great. And the third one's like, I'm putting this online. and they're in the middle of a superhero battle. But the 3 chapters are also, in terms of the script, indie comics, classic comics, and current comics. So it's one story, but the focus and the panel breakdowns and all change to reflect that style of storytelling. Probably no one will ever know but me. Well, and now you. Cool. But I always have to push it in some way that may or may not work.
Hey, I think that's absolutely fantastic. I mean, it keeps things fresh and interesting that way.
Yeah. We don't want we don't want our creators to be bored, because we don't want to be bored. And
exactly.
I think it comes through on the page if they
right.
are.
Right. And if you go outside the lines, sometimes people are following you, and sometimes people are just angry because you didn't do what they expected. So
you're going to be angry no matter what.
Yeah, but and you can't tell me what to do, so I have to play with it.
That's why we haven't told you to shut up. We don't tell you what to do. And we're back. So, what'd you guys think? Pretty interesting, right? Not your typical Dollar Bin Bandits episode, you might say. She has a lot of interesting stories, I must say. She's been through a lot, and she's not afraid to show it.
Yeah, when we posted that we had this interview coming up, so many people were excited to hear about it. Couldn't wait for it to come out. Lots of likes, lots of replies about it. So it's so great to see that the comic community is so excited and happy for her.
Yeah. As I said before, strong point of view. And we love that about our creators. And it's great to hear that she's still working in the industry, but also doing this mysterious project that we'd love to hear about more. She couldn't tell us anything, very secretive about it, but we'll definitely keep our ear to the ground and listen for whatever Barbara will do next. But as we say, that will do it for this episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you all for listening. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and we will see you next time.